The hidden chains, why most people never question the script. Have you ever felt like you were born into a play that had already started, where everyone else seemed to know their lines but you didn't get a script? From the beginning, we're taught how life is supposed to work. Get educated, get a job, get married, have kids, save, retire, die. Each step is a box to be checked. Society doesn't ask you what you want, it tells you what you should want. And if you follow the script perfectly, it promises you safety, approval, and maybe even happiness. But here's the catch. When you're living someone else's idea of a good life, you can get everything you were told to want and still feel completely empty. I know because I've been there, and maybe you have too. Maybe that quiet voice inside you, the one that whispers late at night, has already started asking, is this it?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Let's dig deep. Why do some men walk away from that script? Not in rebellion, but in revelation. They realized the life they were building wasn't theirs. It was inherited, borrowed, programmed. And once you see the script for what it is, a set of expectations designed to maintain order, rather than inspire authenticity, it becomes impossible to go back. But this awakening doesn't come easy. It usually begins with a crisis, the career that doesn't fulfill, the marriage that feels like a performance, the success that tastes like ash. These moments aren't failures, they're ruptures in the illusion. They're signs that your soul is starving in the middle of a feast. So the real question becomes, would you rather be praised for who you're not, or rejected for who you truly are? Now, let's get uncomfortable for a moment. Think about the word freedom. We throw it around like it's a lifestyle brand, but most people don't actually want freedom, they want comfort. And comfort is the enemy of growth. True freedom isn't lounging on a beach with no responsibilities. It's the ability to choose your own path, even when that path is lonely, uncertain, and brutally honest. When a man refuses society's script, he's not just rejecting a lifestyle, he's taking full responsibility for his existence. That means no more blaming parents, politics, or the past. No more hiding behind traditions or trends. It's terrifying because it strips away all the excuses. But it's also liberating because it gives birth to something rare, an authentic self. Here's a thought that might shake you. Most people aren't living, they're performing. They perform at work, in relationships, even on social media. They wear masks so convincingly that they forget there was ever a face underneath. But the man who refuses the script begins to unmask himself, layer by layer. He stops chasing external validation and starts asking internal questions. What do I value? What kind of man do I want to be? What life would I live if no one was watching? And these aren't just philosophical musings, they're practical tools. Because once you know your values, decisions become easier. You stop wasting energy on impressing people who don't matter. You start building something real. But society doesn't like men who think for themselves. It calls them dangerous, unstable, even selfish. Why? Because a man who no longer needs validation is a man who can't be manipulated. You can't sell him things to fill a void he doesn't have. You can't scare him into compliance with threats of disapproval. He sees through the game. He becomes, in a way, untouchable. And that's why such men are rare. Because that level of clarity comes at a cost. You lose friends. You disappoint family. You walk away from predictable paths into the unknown. But what you gain is something most people will never taste: real freedom. Not freedom from responsibility, but freedom through responsibility. The kind that comes when your life and your values finally align. Let me ask you something radical. What if your greatest fear isn't failure, but being truly seen? What if you've spent your life hiding behind the script because you're afraid of what might happen if you were honest about who you are, what you believe, what you really want? The script gives you cover. It lets you blend in. But blending in is a slow death. It's death by imitation. And here's the paradox. The more you try to be like everyone else, the more invisible you become. But the moment you step into your own truth, awkward, messy, imperfect, you start to exist in a way you never have before. You start to matter. Not to everyone, but to yourself. And maybe that's the deepest truth of all. You don't need everyone to understand you. You don't need to be liked by the masses. You just need to stop betraying yourself. Because every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you conform to avoid conflict, every time you pretend to be something you're not, you chip away at your soul. And one day you wake up and realize you've become a stranger to yourself. That's the cost of the script. But the men who refuse it, they pay a different price. They risk loneliness, uncertainty, criticism. But in return, they gain integrity, purpose, clarity. They may walk alone, but they walk in truth. The courage to walk alone, how isolation leads to inner power. When a man first steps away from the script, the silence is deafening. It's not the silence of peace, it's the silence of disconnection. You're no longer part of the chorus, no longer singing the same song as everyone else. And that can feel like death. The human mind is wired for tribe, for belonging, for affirmation. So when you walk alone, your biology screams that something's wrong. But here's the twist most people miss, that silence. That loneliness, it's not punishment. It's purification. It's the space where you begin to hear your own voice sometimes for the first time in your life. Most men confuse isolation with abandonment, but it's actually initiation. It's the sacred fire that burns away the false self and reveals the real one underneath. This is where the transformation begins. When you're no longer surrounded by others telling you who to be, you have to decide that for yourself. That process is terrifying because it forces you to confront everything you once outsourced, your beliefs, your identity, your morality, your purpose. And society doesn't teach you how to do this. It teaches you how to fit in, not how to stand alone. So you start from scratch, you question everything. Why do I believe what I believe? Who am I when no one is watching? What matters more, truth or comfort? These questions aren't theoretical, they're existential. They are the building blocks of a life that is truly yours. And the answers don't come quickly. They come through trial, through inner conflict, through deep solitude. Let's be clear, solitude is not loneliness. Loneliness is the pain of being disconnected from others. Solitude is the power of being connected to yourself. But most men never learn the difference because they never give themselves permission to sit in silence without distraction. We scroll, we drink, we overwork, we chase dopamine, anything to avoid being alone with our thoughts. Why? Because deep down we fear that if we stop distracting ourselves, we'll discover we have no idea who we are. And that's exactly the fear that the script protects you from. The script gives you a pre-packaged identity. It tells you what to wear, what to believe, what to pursue. But when you burn the script, you're forced to build that identity yourself. And that's not a breakdown. That's a breakthrough. Some of the most powerful men I've ever met have gone through this crucible. They've been broken by life, betrayed, fired, rejected, humiliated, but instead of retreating back into conformity, they stayed in the wilderness. They embraced the pain. They didn't numb it. They didn't rationalize it. They used it as fuel, because pain, when faced directly, becomes alchemy. It can purify your intentions, sharpen your focus, and deepen your compassion. That's the strange paradox. The man who walks alone feels more than others, but he also sees more. He sees through the games, the masks, the performances. And because he no longer seeks approval, he becomes incredibly powerful. Not in the sense of domination, but in the sense of clarity. He knows who he is, and that kind of man is unshakable. Think of the great myths and legends. The hero always leaves the tribe, faces trials alone, descends into darkness, and emerges transformed. That's not just a story, it's a metaphor for the psychological journey we must all take if we want to become real. The problem is, modern life has made it easy to avoid that journey. We can live our whole lives in distraction, never once hearing the call to adventure. But if you're watching this, maybe the call has already begun. Maybe there's a voice inside you saying there's more. Not more money, more status, more applause, but more truth, more meaning, more you. And that voice won't go away. It will grow louder the longer you ignore it, until one day it becomes unbearable. That's not a breakdown. That's your soul refusing to be silenced. Let me ask you something that might haunt you. What parts of yourself have you silenced to be accepted? What dreams, ideas, truths have you buried just to avoid judgment or rejection? And what would your life look like if you stopped apologizing for who you are? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're invitations. Because the man who refuses the script doesn't just escape a system, he unleashes a force. The force of a fully integrated human being. And that force is contagious. Other men see it, they feel it, and sometimes it wakes something in them too. That's how change spreads. Not through lectures or rules, but through example. Through the quiet power of someone living in alignment with their truth. The irony is, once you've walked alone long enough, you start to attract others who have done the same. Not because you need them, but because you recognize them. There's a look in their eyes, a weight to their presence, a stillness in their spirit. These are not perfect men. They've failed, they've bled, they've lost everything and kept going. But they've earned something no title or trophy can give: self-respect. And that's the foundation of real brotherhood, not shared hobbies or shallow agreements, but shared depth, shared fire. And from that, a new kind of community can emerge, not one built on conformity, but on authenticity. Not a tribe of followers, but a circle of leaders. The fire of integrity, what happens when a man fully owns himself. There comes a moment after the solitude, after the silence, after the stripping away of everything false, when a man begins to feel something ancient stirring inside him. It's not pride. It's not defiance. It's not even confidence in the usual sense. It's integrity. And I don't mean integrity as a moral checkbox. I mean integrity as wholeness, as the opposite of fragmentation. When a man fully owns himself, he becomes a unified being. His thoughts, his words, and his actions align. There is no internal civil war, no double life, no contradiction between what he believes and what he does. And that is rare, because most people are split between who they are and who they pretend to be, between what they want and what they settle for. But integrity? That's when the pretending ends. Let me show you how powerful this really is. When you meet a man with true integrity, you feel it before he says a word. It's in his posture, his energy, his presence. He doesn't need to dominate the room because he is the room. He doesn't chase attention because he's already at peace with himself. And the wild part? He doesn't even care if you notice. He's not performing. He's not marketing himself. He's just being. But make no mistake, this isn't passive. This isn't some Zen daydream where he floats through life. No, this is fire. This is the man who has walked through hell, faced his demons, questioned everything, and came out the other side with clarity. He knows what he stands for, and more importantly, what he will never stand for again. But here's what society never tells you: integrity has a cost. It means saying no when it's easier to say yes. It means walking away from money, relationships, and opportunities that don't align with your values. It means becoming deeply unpopular at times. Because when you stop playing the game, those who are still playing feel threatened. Your existence becomes a mirror. And mirrors are dangerous. They force people to see what they've been avoiding. So a man of integrity doesn't just live differently, he challenges everyone around him to do the same. Not with words, but with presence. Not with debate, but with example. And that's why such men often walk alone for a while. Not because they're antisocial, but because most people aren't ready to meet someone who can't be bought, swayed, or impressed. Now let's flip the script you were taught. You were told that success is about winning, about being the best, about climbing to the top. But what if success is actually about alignment? What if the real win is living in such a way that you don't have to compromise your soul to sleep at night? That you don't have to wear different masks for different people? That you don't have to sacrifice your truth for applause? Because here's the secret: the men who refuse the script and walk their own path, those are the men who actually create change. Not just in their lives, but in the lives of everyone they touch. They become lighthouses. Not because they shout directions, but because they are the direction. They stand firm while the world spins in confusion. But how do you get there? How do you become that kind of man? You start small. You pay attention to the moments where you betray yourself every time you lie to avoid conflict, every time you agree to something you don't believe in, every time you stay silent when you should speak. Don't shame yourself, just observe. Because awareness is the beginning of transformation. And then, step by step, you correct the misalignments. You speak the truth even when your voice shakes. You walk away even when your knees tremble. You choose what is right over what is easy. And it won't be glamorous. No one will clap. In fact, many will resist. But deep inside, something will start to grow: respect. Not from others, but from yourself. And that's the seed of real power. Let me ask you one final question, one that could change your life. If you lived with absolute integrity for just 1 year, what would you have to let go of? Who would you stop pleasing? What would you stop pursuing? What would you finally start doing that you've been afraid to do? That answer might scare you, and that's good. Fear is often the compass pointing toward your real freedom. Because the life you truly want, the man you're meant to be, lives on the other side of that fear. And the only way out is through, not around it, not over it, through it. And if you're willing to walk that path, if you're willing to lose the world to find your soul, you'll discover something most men never do. You were never lost. You were just buried. In the end, the men who refuse society's script don't do it to be rebels. They do it because they've tasted the truth. And once you've tasted it, no lie will satisfy you again. They do it because they've realized that the price of conformity is too high and the reward for authenticity is too great. They do it not because it's the easy path, but because it's the only path that leads to real freedom. And when you meet a man like that, you'll know. And maybe, just maybe, you'll realize that man has been living inside you all along, waiting for you to invite him out.